for...
The wind howls across the Iranian plateau, carrying with it the dust of 1,000 forgotten cities. Today, if you stand among the towering, broken columns of Persepolis, you feel a haunting silence. But if you listen closely, the silence speaks. It tells a story of a time when the world had never seen anything like it. A superpower so vast, it touched 3 continents. A civilization that invented the very idea of human rights, and a line of kings who believed they were chosen by God to bring order to chaos. For centuries, Western history has told us this story through the eyes of their enemies, the Greeks. We've been taught to see them as the barbarians at the gate, the faceless villains in golden masks. But that is a lie born of propaganda. To truly understand the Persian Empire, we have to look past the Hollywood myths and go back to the beginning, to a time when the Persians were nothing more than a collection of scattered tribes living in the shadow of giants. In the 6th century BCE, the Middle East was a playground of monsters. The Assyrians had spent centuries perfecting the art of terror, flaying their enemies alive and razing cities to the ground. When their empire finally collapsed, it left a power vacuum filled by the Medes, a sophisticated but heavy-handed kingdom that treated the Persians like second-class subjects. The Persians were mountain people, hardened by the brutal winters and the jagged terrain of the Zagros Mountains. They were horsemen, archers, and survivalists, paying tribute in goats and silver to a Median king who sat on a throne of gold in the city of Ecbatana. But in the heart of this subjugated people, a child was born who would rewrite the DNA of human history. His name was Kurush, known to us as Cyrus. The legends of Cyrus's birth feel like something out of a dark fairy tale. It is said that his grandfather, the Median king Astyages, had a recurring nightmare. He saw a vine growing from his daughter's womb, a vine that spread until it choked out his entire kingdom. Terrified of his own bloodline, the king did the unthinkable. He ordered his top general, a man named Harpagus, to take the newborn infant into the wilderness and leave him to the wolves. But fate has a way of mocking the plans of kings. The general, perhaps moved by a shred of humanity or a fear of the gods, couldn't bring himself to spill the royal blood. He handed the crying infant to a lowly shepherd, telling him to kill the boy. Instead, the shepherd and his wife, who had just lost their own child, looked at the baby and saw a miracle. They raised him in the rugged mountains, far from the silk and poison of the palace. Cyrus grew up with the calloused hands of a peasant, but the eyes of a lion. He learned the value of loyalty, the rhythm of the seasons, and the quiet dignity of a people who had been stepped on for too long. When the secret finally came out, when the shepherd's boy was hauled before the king for his noble bearing and undeniable charisma, Astyages realized his nightmare had come true. Cyrus was alive. In a fit of sadistic rage, the king punished his general, Harpagus, by forcing him to eat the flesh of his own son at a banquet. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated evil that would eventually burn the Median Empire to the ground. Astyages spared Cyrus, thinking a boy from the mountains was no threat to a king of kings. It was the greatest mistake of his life. Cyrus returned to his people in Persia as a prince with a vision. He looked at the Persian tribes, divided, bickering, and weary of Median taxes, and he told them they were not slaves. He managed to unite the clans through a mix of raw charisma and strategic brilliance. In 553 BCE, the mountain people did the impossible. They rose up. The Persians were outnumbered and out-equipped, facing the most powerful army in the region. But as the two armies met on the battlefield, the ultimate cinematic twist occurred. Harpagus, nursing a decade of burning hatred for his king, turned his spears around. He defected, bringing half the Median army with him. The gates of the impenetrable Median capital swung open. Cyrus didn't enter as a butcher. He entered as a liberator, taking the Median king's crown and merging the two peoples into one. This was the spark. But Cyrus knew that if he stopped here, the surrounding empires, the fabulously wealthy Lydians in the west and the terrifying Babylonians in the south, would crush this young rebellion in its cradle. He was no longer just a tribal leader. He was the architect of a new world order. He turned his eyes toward the sunset, toward the kingdom of Lydia and its ruler, Croesus. The year was 547 BCE, and King Croesus was the richest man on the planet. He sat in his capital of Sardis, ruling over a kingdom that held the monopoly on gold. When he heard of the mountain prince Cyrus, Croesus asked the Oracle of Delphi if he should go to war. The oracle's reply was haunting. "If you cross the river, a great empire will fall." Croesus smiled and crossed the river. He didn't realize, until it was too late, that the empire destined to fall was his own. The clash between Lydian knights and Persian archers was a collision of worlds. The Lydians were famous for their cavalry, but Cyrus noticed something during a skirmish. The Lydian horses were terrified of the smell of camels. In a brilliant tactical improvisation, Cyrus pulled his baggage camels to the front. As the Lydian cavalry charged, their horses caught the scent, panicked, and bolted. Sardis fell, and the wealthiest man in the world became Cyrus's prisoner. But here, the Persian Empire became something truly unique. Usually, a defeated king was executed. Cyrus spared Croesus and made him an advisor. This was the birth of the Persian secret: tolerance. Cyrus realized you can conquer a land with a sword, but you can only hold it with a heart. One great prize remained: Babylon. Imagine a city so large it felt like a country, protected by walls so thick that two chariots could pass each other on top, and the mighty Euphrates River flowing beneath the gates. The Babylonian king, Belshazzar, laughed at the Persian threat, throwing a massive festival while Cyrus's army sat outside. They thought they were safe. They didn't look at the river. In the dead of night, Persian engineers did the impossible. Miles upstream, they diverted the Euphrates into a marsh. As the sun set, the water level dropped until it was just a shallow stream. The Persian elite, the immortals, simply walked under the gates through the mud. They entered the city while the music was still playing. Babylon fell without a battle. The next morning, Cyrus walked in as a liberator. He decreed that all people were free to worship their own gods. He found the enslaved Jews and gave them money from his own treasury to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. In an era of darkness, Cyrus brought light. But an empire cannot survive on kindness alone. It needs a spine. As the empire grew to span over 2 million square miles, the Persians built the Royal Road, a 1,600-mile highway connecting the heart of the empire. They invented the first postal system, where couriers could carry messages across the continent in 7 days. As Herodotus wrote, neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stays these couriers. They created satrapies, provinces ruled by local governors, overseen by the king's eyes and ears, a secret police force ensuring justice. By the time Cyrus's successor, Darius the Great, took the throne, the empire was the apex of human achievement. Darius built Persepolis, a palace of staggering beauty with walls plated in gold. They were the masters of the known world. But there is a
see.
dangerous gravity to power. When you are the sun, everything else seems small. As Darius looked across the Aegean Sea, he saw tiny, bickering city-states called Greece. To the great king, they were an annoyance, a group of rebels who needed to be taught a lesson. He didn't know he was looking at the one thing his gold couldn't buy. The great king gave the order, and the superpower moved toward a small plain called Marathon. The Persians were defeated there, a shock to the system that left Darius obsessed with revenge. He died with the name Athens on his lips, leaving his throne to his son, Xerxes. If Cyrus was the visionary, Xerxes was the inheritor, raised in a palace where every whim was a command. To be the king of kings, he had to be bigger than his father. In 480 BCE, Xerxes launched the largest invasion force the world had ever seen. He wanted to humiliate Greece. When a storm destroyed his bridge of ships at the Hellespont, he ordered his soldiers to give the sea 300 lashes and throw shackles into the water. He was chaining the ocean, a moment of terrifying hubris. At Thermopylae, the immortals found their short spears useless against Spartan shields in the narrow pass. Xerxes eventually won, but only through a traitor's tip. He marched on Athens and did what Cyrus would never have done. He burned it. He thought he had won, but by burning Athens, he gave the Greeks a reason to unite. Weeks later, at the Battle of Salamis, Xerxes sat on a silver throne on a cliff to watch his final triumph. Instead, he watched a massacre. His massive ships were lured into a trap and decimated. Xerxes retreated, leaving his army behind. The superpower had been humiliated. The real rot, however, wasn't on the battlefield. It was in the heart of the empire. With the king back in Persepolis, the nature of power shifted. The king stopped leading from the front and retreated behind the walls of the harem, surrounded by whispers. Succession became a bloodbath. Brothers murdered brothers, mothers poisoned sons. The satraps, seeing weakness at the center, began to hoard gold and build private armies. Egypt broke away. Cyprus fell. The empire was a beautiful golden suit of armor with a dying man inside. By the time Darius III took the throne, he was inheriting a ticking time bomb. He was a brave soldier, but a king out of time. Across the sea, in Macedonia, a young man who slept with a copy of the Iliad under his pillow was rising. The Persians were prepared for a Greek rebellion, but they weren't prepared for Alexander. In 334 BCE, Alexander stepped onto Asian soil and threw a spear into the sand, claiming the continent. To Darius III, Alexander was just a Macedonian boy. But at the Battle of Gaugamela, the two worlds finally collided for the last time. Darius stood in a sea of spears, but Alexander didn't play by the rules. He formed a giant wedge of cavalry and charged directly at the great king. In the thunder of hooves and the blinding sun, Darius saw the madman of Macedon closing the distance. Panic seized the great king, and his chariot driver turned the horses. Darius fled. In that moment, the 200-year-old dream of Cyrus the Great began to evaporate. Alexander marched to Persepolis, the richest city under the sun. One night, fueled by wine and vengeance, the order was given. The torches were lit, the cedar beams caught fire, and the gold melted, running down the stone steps like blood. The greatest architectural achievement of the ancient world became a funeral pyre. Darius III met a tragic end, stabbed by his own men and left in a wagon to die. When Alexander found his rival, he covered the body with his own royal cloak, sending him back to Persepolis for a king's burial. The Persian Empire was dead, but here is the ultimate irony. Alexander didn't destroy Persia. Persia conquered Alexander. The young Macedonian began wearing Persian robes and demanded his subjects bow in the Persian style. He realized what Cyrus had known, that you cannot rule the world with just a sword. You need the Persian spirit. The forgotten superpower didn't disappear. It became the blueprint for every empire that followed. When the Romans built their roads, they were thinking of the royal road. When the Muslims built their great caliphates, they looked to Persian science. Even today, the concept of religious freedom and the postal service stand in their shadow. The columns of Persepolis still stand today, blackened by fire, but unbowed by time. They remind us that while kings fall, the ideas of justice and human dignity are immortal. The Persians proved that an empire could be a home for all of humanity, measured not by how many people you crush, but by how many you allow to live in peace. As the sun sets over the ruins of the King of Kings, we are left with the echo of a truth history often tries to hide. Empires are built of stone and gold, but they only survive if they are built on the hearts of men. The fire of a conqueror can burn a palace, but it can never extinguish the soul of a civilization.